welcome back to Beyond Damascus, the show where encounter meets mission. It's great to have you here today. And gentlemen, it is good to be here with you once again, Brad.
Yeah, good to see you.
And Dan Dempte.
Hello, sir.
Let's
Aaron.
do this.
Welcome. And I, of course, am Aaron Richards, hosting today's show.
Of course.
Of
The man,
course.
the myth, the legend.
I suppose that shouldn't be self-evident, but here we are in the illustrious Damascus Media Studio. And Jack, working behind the camera. Do you got a question for us today?
Oh.
We're getting pretty into it.
Throw
Okay.
it to him.
Yeah, we're just
Throw it to
jumping
me.
right in. We are.
Throw it to me immediately. So guys, the question for today is, why isn't mass more relevant and spontaneous?
Oh,
Isn't mass more relevant and
scandalous.
spontaneous?
Yeah, why isn't it?
Okay.
Can I interrupt
Come
for a second?
on.
So first of all, we as we know, we
Yeah.
have kind of reconfigured the show that we're focusing on questions submitted by our user base. So if any of our audience has interest in answering a question, feel free to submit that. Best place.
Answering a question?
Answering?
Submit the answer?
You can feel free to
Yeah,
answer.
well, you
No,
can
that's
answer
in the
it.
comments.
No.
Yeah, let's create
You
comments.
can ask
Yeah,
a question in the
afterwards.
comments. Jack, is that the best way?
Comments, or they can
you have an email?
email beyond@damascus.net.
Beyond at Damascus.net.
Okay, so
the email
Yeah,
address.
email if you are curious about having one of your questions answered.
That's good.
Say that question again.
The question is, why isn't mass more relevant and spontaneous?
And spontaneous.
Why isn't
relevant and
mass more
spontaneous.
relevant and spontaneous?
I want the first go. I got it. 2 cents in the jar. I love this question. Why isn't the mass more spontaneous and relevant? Those two are kind of the focus of the question. So I think that the beauty of the Catholic faith is that we teach that that the Lord has revealed something to us in mystery that is ever ancient and ever new. And so I think that oftentimes, like, we can get excited about what is ancient and try to hold on to it without an openness to what is new. And sometimes we can get excited about what is new and not want to hold on to what is ancient. And the Lord's hidden mysteries in both. So when I hear that question, the first thing I think is, well, I mean, it is relevant. And it's relevant because everything God's revealed before, he's revealing to us now. And he's continuing to reveal his infinite goodness as time progresses too. So my answer to why isn't mass more spontaneous and relevant is precisely because God has intended it in such a way where that which he has revealed before is still approachable for us now. And that which he's adding to that is still revealing truths that were held in what was before as well.
Brad, I know you love that ancient and new like paradigm in your own spiritual life.
Whenever you
Yeah,
see a
definitely.
juxtaposition of two contradictory words,
Yeah.
you know that Brad's
Sure.
excited.
Yeah.
No, but like, how do you? So
I
how
do.
does it stay ever new for you in an ever ancient like liturgy?
That's really good.
Like,
Yeah, so
when
I-
you go to mass,
Well, I try to, there's two dispositions of heart that you can have really in anything you do, right? If you're doing something over and over again, think about work, right? Think about driving your car to work. Just think about the things you do every day or the things you do every week. Mass, which is one of those, right? The things that we do every day and every week, like those are our lives, right? So, and I don't want to waste those times. So in order to make it ever new, you have to see the same thing through a different lens. Right. So like when I go to mass, what I try to do every single mass is when you have that automatic response when you get in the pew of like kneeling to pray. Right. And I think sometimes in the past, I've gone and knelt and not actually prayed. I just knew it was the right thing to do. But when I'm at my best, I think I kneel there and I just ask the Lord to highlight things in the mass for me, to highlight things that I've seen since I was a kid, but maybe in a way that sticks out in a new way. And actually an example of that is like 2 years ago, I gave a talk here at one of our outpourings. And it was in a season where I was going to mass and praying that prayer. And the Lord just broke open the Nicene Creed to me in just a totally new way. Because these are words that like I'd memorized when I was in like, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade. Or maybe earlier. I can't even remember. No, probably like first communion prep. So 2nd grade. But anyway, like he just had me focusing in on all the things we believe. And like, he's like, are you declaring that or just saying that, you know? And it helped me like, whoa, this is so engaging. And it was all new to me. Like it was the words that I knew, but it was because I brought a new lens into it that it was new for me.
There's something almost about the formality of the ever ancient that allows your meditation to go deeper.
Interesting,
right?
yeah.
It's like the rosary. Like I'm not sitting there thinking about every word of the Hail Mary. I don't have to think about every part of the Mass, but it's because the structure's there, the ever ancient's there. It allows for the spontaneous meditation and conversation. That the Holy Spirit's alive; He's not dead. Jesus is alive; He's not dead. So He is speaking a new word, a now word today, even though He's already spoken the word as the word.
Well, the Old Testament and New Testament, right? Like, was it Augustine who said that the Old Testament is revealed in the New, and the New is contained in the Old Testament, right? Like, this is exactly what we see when Jesus is made incarnate. Like all of a sudden, like all of this ancient tradition is placed in a person, like this new.
Well,
manifestation.
The liturgy itself almost tells that story as well. That like the liturgy is a story of fulfilled promises. Yeah. And you can't experience the joy of fulfilled promises without knowing and hearing the promise.
Yeah.
And the promise by definition sort of happens through history. So I've got to accept my identity as a person whose destiny is built on the promise of the past.
Yeah.
In order to experience the grace of that fulfillment.
Yeah, I also think it's like a commitment of Christianity that like the Mass is, even when it stays the same, I should be different, right? Like if what we're deciding is how do we make it spontaneous and new, or spontaneous and what was the other
more relevant?
Like, well, have you made yourself more spontaneous and relevant? Like, have you brought who you actually are that day?
No,
or just like,
I'm not very relevant.
Well, no, I think, I don't even mean it in like
making fun of us,
like
Brad,
a challenge way. But no, I do mean it in like how often do we go there? And I am not present to it.
Yeah.
I'm not realizing relevant to any of it at all. But all of a sudden, when I shift that and bring myself with a new lens on life, new experiences that week, it becomes.
All right, I got an idea.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Off the rim. Okay.
By the end of season 2,
I had
hope that Aaron will
we
get
need to get a microphone on the
0
ground.
for 6.
Yeah.
0 for 6.
Right. You're even closer this time.
Yeah.
We'll get there. I realize I have to practice.
All right, what are your 2 cents, Aaron?
Okay. I was inspired by a conference a couple of years ago. Francis Chan, who we were joking about before the show, has really inspired a lot of. Brad, you spent a lot of time with Francis.
Yeah, he spoke at the Seek conference even a couple years ago. Yeah.
And just as this question was asked, I'm thinking to myself, he actually, it wasn't in the context of Mass, but he was sharing about worship once. And he kind of made a commentary on the idea that we oftentimes will go to a time of worship and praise and worship, and that we will sort of judge it by how impactful it was to me. Right. And his comment was, worship was not about you. And as I think about that, the Mass is not about you, right? The Mass is not about, it's not about you. By definition, the Mass is an offering to God the Father. Like the reason that we have a table, an altar at Mass isn't because it looks nice or because every good room centers around a big open table, right? The reason that we have an altar is because it is an altar of sacrifice. And that Jesus, he makes that connection in the Last Supper between the altar of sacrifice and the table where we gather for a meal. So I think it's that, and at the same point, it's not about you, but it is about you insofar it's about us, right? That Mass is the fulfillment of the relationship between the bridegroom and the bride. That at the Mass we see the representation of the Last Supper. We see the representation of of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, and that sacrifice on the cross, right? When Jesus says those words, "It is finished," it's not those words are not like a theological gift that he offers the church, but those words are a declaration of the intimacy and the personal connection that happens in the context of relationship. Right? Beautiful little theology of the body reflection that those words, at least in Latin, are consummatum est. It is consummated, right? This marriage night is now consummated in those words from the cross. So it's not about you. Mass is not about you. We shouldn't be judging its value on how spontaneous and relevant it is to me. But at the same time, it is about us, right? That a lot of times in the liturgy, we've sort of lost sight today, but the liturgy has at times been described as like this dance that actually pulls us in by its momentum and leads us into that place of intimate encounter with him. Like in the Song of Songs, when you see the bridegroom king leading his bride down these down these hallways toward the bridal chamber. And she's prone to get distracted, but then he pulls her back in, and then she looks the other way and runs the other way and determines herself not worthy, but then he pulls her back in. And that is really how the liturgy should speak to us. So relevant and spontaneous. I don't know if those are terms that need to be appropriately applied, but certainly the Mass must be for us something that is deeply engaging and inviting. Why? Because without the us thing, it makes no sense.
That's right. Yeah, Dan, you get passionate about consumerism a lot and like how that's trickled into the church. And I see that a a lot in what he's saying.
Yeah, why? How?
Well, I think, I guess I was, no. Well, it's just like, I'm not going to say it as well as you do, so pick up from me. But like, I think you've mentioned before how like in our society today, primarily we go into situations looking for what we can get because we have this consumerism that's just, it's the water that we swim in day to day. It's like I go to something to get something from it. But when I go to give something to something, I get the most from it. Right. And so that consumerism coming into the church, like that's not supposed to happen because when we see the Mass as the sacrifice it is, and when I sacrifice myself in the Mass, like with Jesus' sacrifice to the Father, I get more than I ever could have if I came and go, wonder what I'm going to feel like when I leave today, you know?
Well, I think the question itself, why isn't the Mass more spontaneous and relevant, is you have to ask the person, well, why are you asking that question? Because chances are they're comparing the Mass with a Protestant service. And the Mass is totally different than a Protestant service, right? A Protestant service, especially in like our mega church culture today, is that it is a consumeristic experience. It's saying, how can I get the lost here? And it's to say it's consumeristic isn't evil, right? They're saying, I want to reach the lost. We're going to get them here to hear the gospel message. And so because of that, they do a lot of things like coffee shops in the lobby, like play places for kids. They do a lot of things to get the lost interested, right? And so what you're suggesting here is, well, we can't compare, we're not comparing apples to apples here. A Protestant service is not the same as the Catholic liturgy. The liturgy is, as you said, a sacrificial offering. And it connects with, like, you look all the way back to our Jewish roots. I mean, even like the people of God offered sacrifices to God. And Paul says, make yourself a living sacrifice. And so the Mass is the representation, right? We make present again the once and for all sacrifice of Jesus Christ on Calvary. And so like it's like whenever you go to Mass, you're in a what do they call it? Like a time machine, right? Like it catapults us to the foot of the cross where you are at Calvary, where Jesus' sacrifice is being made present again. And so this is the perfect offering. And so as you said, ever ancient and ever new, we should be on our knees at this offering like, oh my gosh, like God, you like you're offering yourself to us. And the blood of Jesus, we're not sipping the blood of Jesus. The blood of Jesus is being poured out onto us at Mass. And thank you, Jesus, for that gift. And so you're at the foot of Calvary. And then my favorite part of the Mass is the offertory, because it's also my offertory to him, as you said, Aaron, which is so beautiful that I get to offer at the offertory. We don't just put bread and wine. We're supposed to put our very selves on the altar, right?
Yeah.
Make yourselves a living sacrifice. So it's
I have a clarifying question. Is this your 2 cents, or have you gotten?
No, I'm sorry. This is me getting jazzed up.
You should.
This is me getting jazzed up by your 2 cents. I think it's beautiful.
No, I do too. Well, because I'm thinking about it in the context of like,
listen, hold up, time out. This may be a new format, but it's very, until my 2 cents go into the jar. So if you think I'm talking too much here, you can just say, shut up, Dan. I'm trying to help you don't have to be a complete jerk about it. All right. Hey, sorry, Brad. What were you saying?
I'm trying to remember. I think, no, I do. everything you're saying, I agree with what you were saying
Thank
about
you.
the.
Can we record that? Can we play that back over and over again? Everything I say,
Okay, I'm trying to go back to you were saying that we're not comparing apples to apples, right?
Yeah.
Like, because the Protestant service by its essence is evangelistic.
Yep.
Like the Mass actually in its roots, evangelization was not the end of Mass. Like until Europe was completely won to Christianity, you weren't even permitted into the church to the liturgy unless you were baptized, because it had this like total otherness to it. It was totalitarian. Is what the church fathers would say God is, right? Totally other, what all the way up to Aquinas. Like it's hard to explain him because he's just so different. The liturgy was reflecting that differentness. It takes you to a different world, literally and figuratively. Like you're in a different world at the liturgy. And again, I think that sometimes when we ask questions like this, and I'm not sure if this is where our listener was coming from, but we can want the Mass to be everything all at once. And whereas it is our source and summit, there are other things in the Christian life that have other ends, right? Like evangelization and events for evangelization are great, but like we don't have to necessarily. I don't think.
I'm ready.
Invest all of it, but I see you going in, so you might disagree.
No,
you might disagree.
Please stand.
Oh, I hope he disagrees with that.
I dunked it in that jar, boy.
Go for it.
Here's the deal. So I would. Why
you disagree?
I would. No, I agree. So I would say why. What's less offensive, girl? What? So why is it? Here's my answer. Why isn't the Mass more relevant and spontaneous? My answer is why isn't it? And so like I think there is the one answer which you guys have hit on, that it's ever ancient, it's ever new, that there's this beauty and tradition, the tradition and the now. There's the beauty in the sacrificial offering, and it's a liturgy. It's not a consumeristic. But I think we also have to realize that someone's asking this question because they're hungry for something we're not providing them. And maybe like 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago, the Mass wasn't evangelistic. But then what is our entry point? We need something for people. And so our people, like the modern man is hungry to understand God. So relevant. That means the gospel should connect with their life. The Eucharist should connect with their life. So let's make the Mass, or let's make the church relevant again so that people's lifestyles are transformed by the gospel. Was Jesus relevant? Heck yes. Is the gospel relevant today? It should be. And so we do need to have entry points for the lost. And I think if you're a hardcore traditionalist, or no, I don't want to say that. A hardcore liturgist. What would you say for someone who's
actually, I don't know.
Someone's all about the liturgy and you're really hardcore about it? That you would like. I think sometimes you can forget that there are the lost, right? And you just become a consumer of a different kind of product, right? Where you're just like, I want all of this perfect just for me because this is what I prefer. It's like, no, there are people who are suffering and their eternal lives may end up in hell, eternal separation from the love of God. And so what are we doing as a church to get those people? And I'm not saying Mass has to be the end all be all, but it wouldn't hurt for our homilies to be a little bit more relevant for the lost, right? To actually connect with people in the struggles of their daily lives, as opposed to only talking about theology every single time. Let's talk about finances. Let's talk about how to win people over to Christ in the workplace. Let's talk about depression and anxiety. Let's talk about the things that are relevant to people. And maybe it wouldn't hurt if our music was nice, right? Like I shouldn't suffer through a terrible liturgy because the music group hasn't practiced yet, or because they're still playing bad hymns from the 70s. And so let's make our music beautiful, whether that's like traditional beautiful hymns or modern contemporary worship. Let's just make it beautiful and relevant for people. So I think there's a difference between changing the liturgy for the consumer and just allowing the liturgy to be enjoyable, right? I don't want entertainment, but I do want enjoyment. I want my ears not to pierce when I'm there. I want the homily not to bore me to death, right? And so I think there is something about, let's do our part. I have a cool example of this. So there's this missionary, he's a lay missionary in Ireland, right? And I think sometimes lay people, what they do is when they're frustrated with the way the Mass is presented, they just complain about it because they're not a priest. Well, this lay missionary in Ireland, less than 2% of people under the age of 18 go to Mass on Sunday. So like Ireland is a post-Christian dead nation, right? His ministry is growing like crazy, and he has tons of people coming back to Mass. And the only thing he did was he made Mass 2 hours. So what his change was, I'm going to invite everyone to the Sunday service. The first hour is going to be hardcore evangelistic. We're going to have exciting music with a band, relevant conversation, relevant preaching, some entertainment, get people in the door. And then after the first hour, he transitions into the liturgy and he explains the liturgy. He explains why it's heaven on earth, why the ever ancient is ever new. He does it. And so there's great emceeing, there's great conversation. And then a priest that maybe doesn't have the same dynamic stage presence comes in for the liturgy. And the church is growing like crazy. And then afterwards, they do altar calls beforehand. So if you want to give your life to Jesus, they can give their life. He said, if you did your altar call before Mass today, after Mass, if you want to talk about how to become more Catholic, how to dive deeper into your faith, or how to become Catholic if you're not Catholic, why don't you stay afterwards and we can have conversations? And it's so effective because he's like, okay, Mass isn't the entry point, but he's created an entry point before Mass. It's what we do at youth group. It's what we're like, youth group's 2 hours. Teenagers give 2 hours to youth group, but they won't give an hour for Mass. So let's just rethink the structures a little bit.
So in each response, I think what I'm hearing consistently is that it's not just a reflection or an excuse, right? So you can't use the ever old, ever new, and you can't use the it's not about you response as an excuse for poor quality, right?
Yeah.
For a bad experience and, like you said, bad practice or bad preaching. But I would presume that most of our show is primarily laity. Who's I happen to know that to be a fact.
I thought statistically Cardinals who were mainly listening to our show.
So as we step into maybe just a quick reflection to finish out our conversation today on how do we maintain that mission momentum? What must our response be?
Yeah, I was actually, I think for my mission momentum this week, I was really inspired by what you're saying there, Dan. I'm trying to put words to it. I think that we need to have compassion for our brothers and sisters who don't know Jesus.
Yeah.
Do we want to get so fixated on doing everything right inside the walls of the church that we become a club that feels special instead of like a people who want everyone there? I'm not saying that perfectly, but it just moved my heart because there are people that don't know him and I am better for knowing him. And he has changed my life in its entirety. And so I think mission momentum this week, is there an area where your heart has grown just numb? And how do you re-engage that part of your heart? Have you walked by the homeless person outside of your business office and not thought to yourself, there, but by the grace of God go I, or whatever your heart reaction to that can be, just a compassion that says, I see you, brother. I see you, sister. And so I think my mission momentum for this week, I think the way that you can carry this message with you until the next time we talk together is opening your heart to just evangelistic lenses whenever you're going through your day-to-day life, and maybe even within the church context of how can I re-engage my evangelistic heart within the context of my parish?
I'll piggyback on that. I think my mission momentum is, this is complicated. Give it some thought, right? So this is a complicated conversation. Give this some thought and don't make it cheap. So we do need to reach the lost. Jesus' mission was to seek and I've come to seek
what was lost
and save the lost. And so we need to reach the lost, and we need to have a liturgy that's ever ancient and ever new. And so how do we do this? And how do we have something that's relevant and spontaneous? And how do we reach the lost and at the same time have complete orthodoxy and tradition around the liturgy so that it is a sacred offering that's representing Calvary? And so I think don't find yourself on one camp that just continues to say the same thing you've always said, but instead think about these difficult conversations and realize that it's not easy. And there's no one easy. And if you think your answer is easy, you're probably wrong.
Haven't thought about it long enough.
That's good.
And so go for it, Aaron.
Brad, there's one thing that you mentioned just real quick. I know you've said it at least to me before, and I think even on the show that in the context of your active participation at your local parish, to actually keep your eyes open and look for people who feel like they're lost.
Right.
I love every once in a while you see somebody who's obviously sort of a stranger, out of their element, attending Mass. And I know you've told me before, I've done it myself, like to go and to make it a priority that, hey, I'm going to beeline for that person after Mass.
Yeah.
So we can have a conversation.
Right. Yeah. Engaging.
Right. Mine is a little different. I think again, it's a two-parter that you need to be a part of the solution. So I know there's one of our staff members here who was really excited a couple of years ago about you being a part of your actual parish within your established parish boundaries. That like, hey, you're on mission here in Centerburg, Ohio.
This zip code or whatever.
Because you belong to a parish and you have to be the life that's brought to that parish. I think there's something really honorable about that. And at the same time, as a parent, I want to maybe offer permission that if you are experiencing or exposing your kids to an experience of Mass that is not life-giving and engaging to them and to you, there's something wrong. And you do need to make a change in order to stay engaged. There's an open invitation to make a change in order to stay engaged. Whether that means more intentional or intense preparation for participation in Mass, whether that means processing with your kids so that they can engage in something actively that they might otherwise find, boring, or if that's even looking to a different parish, if that schedule or that style might be more appropriate to today.
Or just sending them to Catholic Youth Summer Camp where they can fall in love with the Eucharist and they'll want to go to Eucharistic adoration. They'll discover the beauty of Mass and
the programmer
all
himself.
Of that. So cysc.com for middle schoolers and high schould registration opens in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, all joking aside, that is why we exist.
That is exactly why we exist.
I would also be remiss not to mention that actively engaging in your mission momentum for this week could be to continue to share this conversation with somebody who you think might find it meaningful. So if you would like to stay up to date on all the topics that we address here on this show, go ahead and subscribe to this show or this channel. And also, please feel free to share this with someone who you might think might be in need. I think that about wraps it up for
There's
today,
really
guys.
just 3 words that we have to say to everyone.
What are they? What are they, Brad?
Remember, everyone. Mission makes sense.
We're going to land that.
One of these days, we're going to get
good.
that. Yeah. But Aaron forgot. He was supposed to introduce that.
Okay,
you helped him out.
That's what
we're a team.
We need each other.
Have a great week. We'll see you again next time. God bless.